Hello everyone, this is Jason here, and today I'll be going over the first two steps of design thinking, which are the empathize and define steps. But first, let me introduce ourselves. So, we are Code for Mauritius, a nonprofit organization by Stanford University students and alumni that aims to provide free, high quality computer science education in Mauritius. And over the past year, we have organized two coding conferences, one entrepreneurship conference, several workshops and panels, as well as mentored many school clubs and also helped set up some new coding clubs around secondary schools in Mauritius. So if that's something you're interested in, please do let us know. And I personally have graduated from RCPL in 2017 and more recently graduated from Stanford with a bachelor's in human computer interaction and a master's in artificial intelligence. And during my time at Stanford, I have been a teaching assistant for many CS classes such as Introduction to Programming, Natural Language Processing, Databases, and Senior Software Project. About my background in design thinking, I have been the director of Stanford ACE's Design Thinking and Entrepreneurship Conference for high schoolers, and I have also taken a lot of design thinking classes either through my human computer interaction program or from the design school at Stanford. And currently, I'm a software engineer at Google. And these are your favorite Code for Mauritius mentors for the Young Makers Design for Impact Challenge. So we have Unji, who is also the co-founder of Code for Mauritius and currently a software engineer at Google. We have Lydia, who is a software engineer at Tesla. We have Sunny, who also goes by Zisian, who is a PhD student at University of Washington. We also have Ayush, who is a current research assistant at Stanford Vision and Learning Lab and the Stanford ML Group. We also have Raymond, who is a software engineer at Coinbase, and Ricky, who is a founding engineer at OBAI. All right, let's get started. So what is design thinking? So design thinking is an innovation process that mitigates risk by focusing on people, which essentially means that we want to understand specific human problems deeply. So these are the 5 steps of design thinking. In the empathize phase, you'll want to take time to observe your environment and engage with users. Next, you'll want to define the problem that you're trying to solve. And then you'll be ideating, which means brainstorming as many potential solutions as possible. And later, you'll narrow down on these solutions as you evaluate them. Then you'll be prototyping these solutions, and a prototype is basically any physical representation of your idea or solution. And finally, you'll be testing out your prototypes to gather feedback, refine solutions, and continue to learn about your users. And one thing I want to note here is that this design thinking process is not linear. Indeed, you can spend time to empathize with someone's needs, then define a problem that you believe matches these needs. But then later, you realize that the problem doesn't really exist at all. So then you have to return to the empathize phase. Or maybe you get all the way to the prototype stage before you realize that you're building something that doesn't really match the problem you define at all. So then you have to go back to the ideating step. So yeah, these are the 5 steps, and we'll be going over each one at a time, and hopefully you'll be learning a lot from each step for your project. So let's start with the empathizing stage, which is really the foundation of design thinking and human-centered design. And this process is also what we call need finding. So first, you try to define the needs. Like, what are the problems you are trying to solve? Next, you also want to define the users. Who are the people you're solving for? And I want to mention here that At this stage, you are trying to identify the problem, not the solution. It can be very, very tempting to think about the solution right away before even thinking about the problem. So, how do you empathize? First, you can observe your users and the behavior in the context of their daily lives. Second, you can engage with your users, for example, by interviewing them. Thirdly, you can immerse yourself in the experience of your users and try to gain some first hand experience yourself. And here, I really want you to assume a beginner's mindset because you may come in with your misconceptions or stereotypes about how to solve a particular problem. So, assuming a beginner's mindset really helps you build empathy with your users. So, now let's talk about observations. So, some things that you should be looking for here, first of all, is how does the user interact with a product that maybe you're trying to redesign? And as you observe, you should try to note down everything that you see, especially things that are unexpected. After observing, you can then ask questions to understand more deeply. And while doing so, you should try to note any contradictions between what the user says and does. So now let's talk about interviewing. There are four key things to keep in mind for interviews. First, you want to try to look for specific stories. So instead of asking your interviewer, what do they generally like about X? Maybe you can ask them, what was your experience the last time you did X? Second, you want to listen and follow up. Like while you might prepare a lot of questions for your interviews, it is very important to listen intently and follow up with relevant questions. Number three, try to avoid leading questions. Like an example of a leading question is, don't you agree that X is good for you? And yeah, so you should avoid that because that's kind of trying to put an answer in their mouth. Fourth, really want to try to get the bottom of why. Like, why do they do this thing? Why do they do it this way? Why do they care about X, Y, or Z? One trick that I like to use when I do interviews is to first start with a grand tour. And the reason is that this is a great starting point because it gives you a lot of factual, specific, expansive threads to pull on. For example, you can, for something physical, you can be like, actually ask like, oh, give me a tour of your kitchen or of your closet or of your backpack. Or metaphorically, you can ask him to say, walk me through your day yesterday from when you woke up, or walk me through your dinner last night. And there are many ways to ask why. For example, you can say, why is X important to you? Or you could say, sounds like X is important to you. Tell me more about X. Or simply just repeat the last four words they said. So here's an example of just these ways of asking why. And you can look at it in your own time. And again, there's some things you should be careful of. So you should try not to be too general in the questions you're asking. Second, you should try not to be married to your idea. Like if you already want some answer from your interviewer, then that's not the right mindset to have, because you do have to be open to the unexpected. Second, third, like I said earlier, try not to be glued to your planned questions by not having any follow-ups. Instead, you should listen and have follow-up questions that are related to what your interviewer just said. And you should also try not to be too hypothetical, because it's hard for users to imagine a situation and what they might do in that situation. You should also try to avoid leading questions like we just talked about, and try to ask why as often as possible. And yeah, here's a sample of great questions you can use for your interviews. And yeah, these are like generally open-ended questions which ask about like a specific time, like looking for a specific story. And yeah, I would encourage you to take a look at this. And this is what an interview usually looks like. It's kind of like a story or a movie. So you first have like an introduction of yourself and your interviewer, and then you try to build some rapport, and then you try to get a grand tour. Next, you try to evoke stories, and from these stories, you try to explore the emotions and pull some threads that are interesting. And finally, you reflect on the whole interview and what your user said to try to get some concluding thoughts from your interviewer. And finally, you wrap up and thank your interviewer. And as you can see, it goes usually from more close ended, basic, everyday questions and actions, more like what the user does, to more specific why questions and how questions towards the end of the interview. So that was the empathize step of design thinking. Next, we'll be talking about the define step. Defining is really what brings clarity and focus to the design space. Because so far you have gathered a lot of information from your interviews, from your observations, from your research, and now you really have to try to make sense of this widespread information, which is why we also sometimes call defining sense making. So let me introduce the concept of point of views. And basically, you'll want to create a point of view for each person that you interviewed. And these point of views can be quotes, actions, feelings, thoughts, or a combination of all of these. And you want to make sure to include any surprises, tensions, and contradictions from the interviews, because this is really how you will be able to generate some really good insights. And this is how you can structure a point of view. For example, we met this person, we were amazed to realize that blah blah blah, and finally, it would be game changing if blah blah blah. So this is an example. So we met Pradeep, an HSC student studying for his exams. We were amazed to realize that Pradeep gets the most work done on days where he has time to take a break to play the electric guitar. It would be game changing if there was a way for students to incorporate their hobbies into their academic life and routine. This is a great way to structure a point of view, and we encourage you to do the same for each person that you interview. After coming up with a point of view, you'll want to be generating how might we questions. A how might we question is basically a statement that helps you frame a point of view in a way that launches ideation. So here, so just going back to the same point of view example that we just looked at, which is about Pradeep, an HSC student studying for his exams. And let's take an example of one that's too broad. And too broad because it includes too wide of a range of solutions. And that example is like, how might we make Pradeep happy? This is really broad. And how might we question that's too narrow is, how might we create an app that tracks Pradeep's happiness and provides happy interventions? This is too narrow because you're trying to impose a lot of boundaries already, and this will really restrict you in your ideation phase afterwards. Some good examples of how might we questions for Pradeep is, how might we incorporate students' hobbies into the academic curriculum in Mauritius? How might we encourage study breaks and the prioritization of mental health in students' busy schedules? And these are good examples because they are broad enough to include a wide range of solutions and narrow enough to impose helpful boundaries. Here is another example of a challenge and a point of view, and a how might we questions. So here we want to say redesign the airport waiting space. And the point of view is that a frenzied mother of three rushes to her gate to find out her flight is delayed. She has to entertain her playful children to avoid irritating already frustrated fellow passengers. And there's a few ways you can brainstorm how might we questions. For example, you can try to ask like how can you alleviate the tension? Here in this case, it's how might we separate the kids from fellow passengers? Or you can ask yourself how might we explore the opposite? Like how might we make the wait the most exciting part of a trip? You can ask yourself how might we question an assumption here? Like how might we remove wait time altogether? Or you can try to think about how might we create an analogy from need to context. And an example here is how might we make the airport like a spa, like a playground, where children already have lots of fun and don't irritate other people. Alright, so now it's your turn to apply the concepts that we just learned, that is, the empathize and define steps of design thinking into the context of your own project. So for the need finding report, which is the first report you'll have to submit, you'll be picking and exploring a problem space of your own choice. Please do remember that it has to align with one of the themes of a challenge, which is civic engagement, community building, lifelong learning, or environmental consciousness. You'll be conducting some interviews to better understand your problem space and to better understand the needs of your potential users. And through these interviews, you'll also be uncovering pain points by creating point of views and how might we questions. The report should be about 2 pages long, 1 page minimum, and it's really free format, so feel free to include any sort of pictures, notes, diagrams that you'd like. And really, it's just a way for us to keep track of your progress and to make sure you're on the right track. And the due date for this report is the 27th of May. And again, this is more of a suggested due date, but we highly encourage you to submit by then so that we can give you timely feedback. Alright, so that's it for this week. Thank you for tuning in, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what sort of problems your teams will be working on. Thank you.